You've been lied to about Mary Magdalene. She's been called prostitute, consort, woman of shame, defiler of men. Some even call her the wife of Jesus. But there are few women in the Bible who have as much mystery surrounding them as Mary Magdalene. Even non-Christians are obsessed with her, and her name is whispered of in conspiracy after conspiracy. And this isn't a recent development. From the very beginning, Mary Magdalene has been the subject of innuendo, rumor, and even a non-canonical gospel. But what does the Bible really tell us about Mary, and how and why has she been so maligned throughout the centuries? In the 4 accepted Gospels, we only have one clue about Mary's life before Jesus. Luke 8:1-3 tells us Jesus cast 7 demons out of her. But from that moment, Mary Magdalene does a complete life turnaround, and she follows Jesus all the way, becoming a financial supporter of Jesus' ministry. So we can infer she had means, income, wealth. And we also know that she was loyal. At Jesus' arrest, when the disciples abandoned Jesus like rats off a ship, Mary Magdalene doesn't leave. Writings suggest she was there at Jesus' mock trial and heard Pilate's offering of Barabbas instead of Jesus, hearing the same crowd that had welcomed Jesus into Jerusalem with palm fronds, later chanting, "Crucify him, crucify him." Mary was there at the cross, witnessing Jesus' blood flowing like rivers onto the ground, hearing him cry out, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." And according to John 20, Mary was the first to see him resurrected and was commissioned by Jesus to tell the others of his resurrected life. It's also inferred she was with the disciples at Pentecost in Acts 1:14. And all told, Mary is mentioned 12 times by name in the Gospels. That's more than most of the apostles, and that's big. Jesus had many followers, not just the 12. And while we don't know their names, we know Mary's. And this is very uncommon in ancient texts, and Greek texts in particular. We got to get out of our modern minds here. Since few women in the ancient world knew how to read or write, most of our info about their lives comes to us filtered through the eyes of men. And influential Greek writers such as Hesiod, Aristotle, Pericles, Euripides, Hipponax, and a slew of others, they all wrote negatively of women. And even in a court of law, a woman's testimony was regarded as dubious and too easily swayed by emotion. So a woman being the first to witness the resurrection would have immediately cast her story into doubt among early Greek readers. But yet, here she is, right in the middle of everything, turning things upside down. The first proclaimer of the resurrected life of Jesus. This is a big, big deal. Maybe too big a deal to some early church leaders. And many modern scholars believe that because of the way that Jesus empowered women, which he did. Look at the longest recorded conversation Jesus has with another human being in the Bible, the woman at the well, and other mentions of Jesus publicly engaging women in conversation, which was a big no-no at the time. Appearing to Mary after the resurrection, this made many ancient male church leaders, and some modern ones, very uncomfortable, especially regarding Mary. And because of this, we begin to see attempts to diminish her role and her worth, because there are a lot of false things about Mary that the Western world has come to accept as facts. That just ain't true. Were you taught Mary Magdalene was a prostitute? Super common. But there are absolutely no definitive scriptural references to Mary Magdalene as being a prostitute. Not a single one. She's been tied to the prostitute who washes Jesus' feet in Luke 7, and she's also been tied to the woman caught in adultery in John 8, even in modern movies like Passion of the Christ. But the Bible doesn't name either one of these women as Mary. We don't know who those women are. And since Mary Magdalene is mentioned by name multiple times, if Mary were those women, she would have been identified as such, but she was not. So where did this story come from? Some of the early discoloring of Mary Magdalene stems from how Mary began to take a significant role in what we now call Gnostic Christian sects. While Mary's role and the role of women in general was being diminished in what was becoming traditional church thought, in Gnostic works, Mary's role was being elevated, such as in the Gospel of Thomas, the Pistis Sophia, the Dialogue of the Savior, the Gospel of Philip, and the Gospel of Mary. And some argue that Mary Magdalene took an elevated form in the Gnostic faiths, with Peter often portrayed as an adversary to Mary. So while Peter represented traditional male thought in some Gnostic works, Mary represented the opposite, the yin to the yang, so to speak, with some Gnostic works referring to Mary as the one loved by Jesus more than the others. And in traditional church thought among church fathers claiming lineage to the apostles, that was not going to fly. And then there's Pope Gregory the Great, who during his Easter sermon in 591 used his papal authority to declare that Mary was the sinful woman mentioned in Luke 7, strengthening the story of Mary's life as a prostitute. And Pope Gregory asserted that Mary Magdalene and Mary of Bethany were the same person. According to him, Mary's sins were compounded by the fact that the oil used by the woman in Luke 7 to anoint Jesus' feet was also used by Mary for sensual purposes, thereby giving rise to this idea that Mary was a vain and lustful woman. And with that, boys and girls, in Western Christianity, Mary as a prostitute was off to the races. Mary as the penitent prostitute became a popular motif in Christian artwork, and she was even named the patron saint of prostitutes who found Jesus. And even up to the 20th century, Magdalene houses, or Magdalene asylums if you want to be real about it, were created as halfway houses for fallen women guilty of prostitution or who became pregnant outside of marriage, and young girls who had been abandoned by their families. And while the character assassination of Mary Magdalene by the Catholic Church ended in 1969 with the refutation of her being guilty of prostitution, damage had been done for about 1,600 years, and most folks still identify this important woman of the faith as a prostitute. And because of this suppression of Mary's role in Jesus' ministry, it's given rise to crazy conspiracy theories and resuscitation of old ideas, such as the reason the church diminished her role was because she was Jesus' wife, and with Jesus she had children, and that legend is way older than the Da Vinci Code, by the way. But again, there is no scriptural evidence there. Zero. But what we moderns do often miss, it's obvious that Mary was very important to early believers. And this is because Christianity as a faith that people were willing to die for began at that fateful moment at the tomb. At the crucifixion, almost everyone ran like cowards. But after the resurrection, these same people who ran were willing to and died for Jesus. And it was Mary at the tomb, Mary becoming the first proclaimer that he is risen, that helped begin this process. Jesus chose Mary, a woman, to be the first speaker of the resurrected Christ. This is massive. It truly is, especially when you understand culturally the role of women. But not just an anonymous woman. Mary, in the moment when she is most distraught at the empty tomb, when all hope is lost, in that moment, Jesus calls her by her name. Mary. What an honor. A woman who had suffered, but who had been healed. A woman who had followed Jesus, financially supported Jesus, never abandoned Jesus, even at the cross, and was there to anoint his mangled, broken body. And Jesus called her by her name. Her name is Mary Magdalene, and it's time that we give her the honor that she is due.